The knock came right as I was caulking the last window trim on the south side of the cabin. I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened the door to find her standing there, platinum curls, oversized sunglasses, clipboard hugged to her chest like it was a holy relic. "Good morning," she chirped, her lips tight in a smile that screamed fake. "I'm Tricia Newhall, HOA president for Whispering Pines. We've had a report of unauthorized renovations on this property." I raised an eyebrow. "You're standing on my land." "This is outside your jurisdiction." She blinked like I'd just spoken ancient Greek. "Actually, sir, Whispering Pines bylaws clearly state that any property within visual range of community roads is subject to aesthetic review." I almost laughed. "That's not a thing." She ignored me and scribbled something on her clipboard. "You've added new trim, repainted, and I see a new porch railing. We didn't approve any of that." "I don't need your approval," I replied flatly. That stopped her for a second. She straightened her back like she was about to scold a teenager. "Sir, if you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to issue escalating fines and potential legal action." I leaned against the doorframe. "You're going to issue legal action against the county inspector?" Tricia froze. I let it sink in. "Name's Nolan Fairley. I sign off on permits for Pine County, including my own. Everything I've done here is fully permitted, properly filed, and inspected. By me." Her jaw opened slightly, then shut. "Well, it's still a conflict of interest." "Nope. County ordinance allows self-inspection for licensed inspectors on personal property as long as it's filed publicly." Which, again, it is. She puffed up like a balloon about to pop. "We'll see what the board has to say, sure. Just make sure they're ready to talk about the multiple violations I've already documented in Whispering Pines, including that illegal stone fountain the treasurer's been building in her backyard for 3 weeks without a permit." Her mouth opened again, but nothing came out this time. She turned and stomped down my gravel driveway, heels clicking like gunshots against the stone. I closed the door, grinning. I knew this wasn't the end of it. HOA types like Tricia never give up after one swing. But she just picked a fight with the wrong guy, and I had a full paper trail badge and a camera pointed right at her clipboard. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. HOA story HOA stories Homeowners Association stories I didn't hear from Tricia for the next 4 days, which was just long enough to make me suspicious. On the 5th morning, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox, hand-delivered, no postage. Inside was a formal notice from the Whispering Pines HOA board, citing me for unauthorized structural modifications, non-compliant exterior aesthetics, and this was my favorite, maintenance activities that disrupt community harmony. I tapped the paper against my palm as I stood in my kitchen, coffee cooling beside me. The notice wasn't mailed, which meant Tricia or one of her cronies had personally trespassed onto my property to deliver it. I flipped to the last page. A fine had already been assessed, $500, due by the end of the month. Failure to pay would result in a lien against the offending property, which they apparently believed they had jurisdiction over. I set the notice down, pulled out my phone, and called someone I hadn't talked to in over a year. "Fairley," came the voice on the other end. "Hey, Deendra. Need help digging up some board filings." There was a pause. Whispering Pines, you guessed it, still pulling stunts. This time they're trying to slap a lien on a property that isn't under their governance. Deendra exhaled sharply. "I'll check the county registry." "Hold tight." 10 minutes later, she texted me a screenshot of the subdivision boundary filing. My property sat a full quarter-mile outside the legal perimeter. No overlap, no annexation, no conditional provisions, just good old-fashioned overreach. I printed the map, grabbed the camera footage of Tricia walking up my driveway, and drove into town. I didn't go to the HOA office. I went to the county records building. Inside, I found Morris, our zoning compliance supervisor, eating a sandwich at his desk. I dropped the envelope next to his elbow. "They've been busy." He looked through the papers, chewing silently. When he got to the fine notice, he stopped. They actually assigned a lien, claim they're authorized because my cabin's visible from the road, Morris snorted. That's like saying you can fine someone for having an ugly car in their driveway. He flipped through the rest, then leaned back in his chair. Want me to send them the cease and desist? He asked. Not yet. I want to see how far they'll go. But I need a certified copy of the boundary lines and a statement that the property's not under HOA jurisdiction. He nodded. Done by lunch. As I walked out of the building, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a neighbor, Tina, who lived 3 lots down the dirt road from me. You might want to check the community Facebook page, she said. Why? Tricia posted a warning about an aggressive homeowner acting outside legal bounds. She didn't name you, but she included a photo of your porch. I stopped walking. She posts that publicly? Yep. And comments are blowing up. By the time I got home, the post had over 80 replies. Half were HOA diehards cheering Tricia on. The other half, mostly longtime residents, were tearing her apart. One comment from an older gentleman named Walt caught my eye. He's the same guy who signed off on my septic replacement. Tricia, you're barking up the wrong tree. Another from a woman named Leslie. I've lived here 20 years and never seen him do anything but keep to himself and help neighbors. You're embarrassing yourself. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The post vanished an hour later. That evening, I installed a second camera, this one pointed toward the road, and reviewed the footage from the past week. 2 nights earlier, a silver Lexus had pulled into my driveway around midnight, headlights off. The driver had exited, walked up to the porch and dropped something into the mailbox, Tricia's car. I saved the clip to a thumb drive and labeled it. 2 days later, I got a knock around 9:00 a.m. It wasn't Tricia this time. It was a man in a navy sport coat, early 50s, hair gelled back like he was about to sell me a timeshare. He introduced himself as Kent Willifby, legal counsel for Whispering Pines HOA. Mr. Fairley, he said, smiling with all the warmth of a vulture, we're hoping to come to a resolution without escalation. I'm sure you understand. I didn't invite him in. You're trespassing, I said. He ignored that. The board is within its rights to enforce community standards. However, if you're willing to submit a retroactive application for the changes, we can expedite review for a small fee. Retroactive application for something I'm not required to submit in the first place. He blinked slowly. I continued. You have no authority here. This property's not within the HOA's mapped jurisdiction as filed with the county. I have certified copies. I'm going to stop you there, he said, holding up a hand. We believe the original developer intended for this road to be governed by the HOA, and there's a clause in the founding documents suggesting as much. Intent doesn't override legal filings. Courts might see it differently, he said, shrugging. Then I'll see you in court. He hesitated. You know, I added, it's funny. I was reviewing some footage. Tricia delivered that violation notice after midnight. That's unlawful entry, potentially criminal trespass. But I'm sure the sheriff will be understanding when I turn over the footage. His jaw tightened just a fraction. There's no need to involve law enforcement. Too late. Already filed the report. He left without another word. The next morning, I met with Deputy Granger at the sheriff's office. I handed over the footage, the fine notice, and the HOA's attempt to fabricate jurisdiction. Granger took notes, then leaned back in his chair. They've pulled crap like this before, mostly minor stuff, but this, fabricating fines and trying to place liens without proper legal basis, that's fraud. Can we act on it if the DA agrees? I'll elevate it. By the end of the week, Tricia was served with a formal warning for criminal trespass. Her car had also been flagged for suspicious activity after midnight, which meant she'd be receiving a separate summons for that joyride up my driveway. But the real bombshell came from Deendra. She called me during lunch, voice tight with excitement. You're not going to believe what I found. Hit me. There's a discrepancy in the HOA's filings. Their last jurisdiction map was altered 4 years ago, but it was never properly notarized. That means their entire claim over the eastern ridge, including your road, is invalid. I blinked. You're serious? Dead serious, and it gets better. They've been collecting dues from over a dozen homeowners in that area for years illegally. My fingers tightened on the phone. That's wire fraud. Mail fraud too if they sent invoices. Exactly. I've got everything documented. I hung up and drove straight to Morris's office. By the next morning, the county had frozen Whispering Pines' operating account pending investigation, and the homeowners on the Eastern Ridge. They were furious. I didn't even have to say a word. The moment the news got out, a group of them formed a coalition and drafted a complaint to the state HOA Oversight Board. They also hired a civil attorney, someone with a reputation for dismantling corrupt boards piece by piece. As I stood on my porch that evening watching the sun dip behind the tree line, a white SUV crept down the gravel road. It slowed as it passed my cabin. Tricia was in the passenger seat, face pale, staring straight ahead like I didn't exist. She didn't stop, just kept going. Good. She was starting to realize what it felt like to be on the wrong end of authority. The next week started quiet, but that uneasy kind of quiet, the kind you get before a thunderstorm rolls in and flattens everything not bolted down. I was putting in a new drainage trench behind the cabin when a city-issued black SUV pulled up beside my truck. I recognized the license plate before I even saw him step out. Detective Caleb Rourke, Internal Affairs Liaison to the County Fraud Division. I'd worked with him a few years back on a contractor embezzlement case. He didn't come out to the sticks unless something big had landed on his desk. He gave me a nod and walked over, not wasting time with pleasantries. You got a minute? I wiped the sweat from my brow. You tell me. He pulled out a manila folder and held it up. We got a preliminary packet from the DA's office. Whispering Pines HOA is under criminal review, not just misfiling. This one's serious. How serious? He flipped the folder open and handed me a photocopy of a check. It was made out to WPH Maintenance Fund, signed by a resident I didn't know. The amount, $28,000. The memo line read, retaining wall assessment. That's not even a legal line item, I muttered. Rourke nodded. Exactly, and it gets worse. The homeowner died 6 months ago. The check was cashed 2 weeks ago. I stared at him. Forgery? Looks that way. DA's office thinks someone in the HOA accessed her estate mail and backdated the check. Let me guess, the funds were deposited into an unregistered account. Bingo. We traced it to a private fund under the name Tricia Maynard Holdings. Maynard, Tricia's maiden name. I crossed my arms. So she's funneling money through a shell account and using fake assessments to justify it. That's the working theory. But the county can't move unless the fraud is proven across multiple households. So far, we've got 3 suspicious payments from deceased or relocated residents. I walked over to my truck and unlocked the glove box. Pulled out the thumb drive I'd been keeping updated with every HOA document I'd collected, including their annual meeting minutes and scanned payment records I'd gotten from a neighbor's disclosure packet. I handed it to Rourke. Then you're going to want to see this. There's a line item in their last meeting notes claiming repair costs for a private pump station, only it doesn't exist. I checked the parcel. It's undeveloped forest. He tucked the drive away. If this checks out, you just handed me probable cause for a search warrant. Glad to help. He paused before getting into the SUV. You know this won't stop with her. Boards like this go deep. Once we tug the thread, the whole sweater might unravel. I'm counting on it. By the time he drove off, the sky had turned gray. I could hear thunder grumbling somewhere beyond the ridge. That afternoon, I got a knock from a woman I'd never met. Late 40s, sharp features, rust-colored cardigan. She introduced herself as Olivia Fenwick, former HOA secretary. I'm not here with them, she said before I could say a word. In fact, I left the board 3 months ago. Quietly? Why? She looked down the road as if making sure no one else was listening. Because Tricia started asking me to backdate meeting minutes. She wanted me to insert fake votes and budget justifications for things that were never discussed. When I refused, she cut off my access to the financial records and told everyone I'd moved. Moved? She told the rest of the board I left the state, and then replaced me without a community vote. That was illegal under their own charter. Every board seat required an open election. She's running the whole thing like a private company, Olivia continued. No transparency, no member oversight. I tried to speak at the last open meeting and she had security escort me out. She hired security, private firm, out of uniform. She says it's for board protection. I took a breath, already feeling the pressure build behind my eyes. Do you have any of the emails she sent you? I printed everything before I left, including the altered minutes. She handed me a folder. Inside were 6 months of documents, some marked draft, others labeled final. The differences were glaring. Budget items appeared out of nowhere. Votes passed unanimously in the final versions didn't even exist in the drafts. I can testify if needed, she said. I just want this to stop. That made 2 of us. I contacted Rourke the next morning and he picked up the new evidence within the hour. With Olivia's documents and the financial trail from the forged checks, the DA's office filed for a subpoena. It was executed the next day. County auditors and fraud investigators raided the HOA's temporary office, a converted storage unit behind a strip mall, ironically located outside Whispering Pines itself. Inside, they found a stack of blank ballots, 10 unfiled lien notices, and a laptop containing spreadsheets that referenced extraction fees. Extraction fees. That was the term they were using for the fake assessments. The same day, Tricia was brought in for questioning. She didn't go quietly. According to Rourke, she showed up with a lawyer, refused to answer most of the questions, and claimed it was all a misunderstanding born of administrative oversight. But the accounts told a different story. So did the paper trail, and then came the twist no one expected. Morris, the zoning supervisor, found an old document buried in the original county plat approvals for Whispering Pines. It was a handwritten note from the original developer, a clause that stated the HOA's jurisdiction was never intended to extend east of the ridge due to watershed protections. That made their annexation attempt not just invalid, but in violation of environmental agreements with the state. The fallout was immediate. The State Environmental Board got involved. So did the Department of Consumer Affairs. The HOA's authority was suspended pending full audit, and a temporary receiver was appointed to oversee operations until a legal board could be elected. Tricia resigned that night. But the damage wasn't over. A week later, I got a call from a local reporter named Jasper Carr. He was working on an exposé about HOA corruption and wanted to interview me about the Whispering Pines case. I met him at the diner on Route 17, brought copies of every document I'd submitted to the county, and laid it all out. He listened, took notes, and asked one question that stuck with me. Why didn't you just move? I looked out the window at the old hills and spruce trees I'd grown up around. Because this place is worth fighting for, I said, and people like her. They count on you giving up. He nodded slowly and closed his notebook. The article ran 3 days later. Front page, title, HOA Tyranny in the Pines, How One Resident Turned the Tide. By the end of the month, the homeowners elected a new board. Olivia was named president, the new treasurer. Walt, the same guy who defended me on the community page, I stayed out of it. I wasn't interested in power, just peace. But I did get one last message this time through official channels. The DA's office filed charges against Tricia for wire fraud, forgery, and misuse of public trust. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the state pushed back. Turns out she'd done this before in another neighborhood under a different name. This time, she wouldn't walk away clean. As the fall rolled in, I finished the trench, resealed the north wall, and finally got around to hanging the cedar swing I'd been meaning to install since spring from my porch. I could see the ridge line tall and quiet, the way it should be, no clipboards, no fake fines, just open sky. And when the new board sent out their first newsletter, it came with a simple message printed in bold. No decisions made without a vote, no lies, no intimidation. I pinned it to my fridge, not because I needed the reminder, but because it reminded me that sometimes the quiet guy with the hammer and a badge can still build something stronger than fear, something that lasts. By mid-October, the leaves had turned brittle gold and rust, and the air carried that sharp edge that meant snow wasn't far off. I was in the garage replacing the belt on the generator when I noticed the envelope under my windshield wiper. No stamp, no return address, just my name in big block letters. I opened it carefully, expecting more HOA nonsense. Instead, it was a cease and desist letter, not from the HOA. From a private law firm in Charleston. The letter accused me of defamation, unethical weaponization of county authority, and intentional disruption of community governance. It threatened civil litigation unless I issued a formal apology and agreed to refrain from interfering with Whispering Pine's internal operations. At the bottom was a signature. Kent Willoughby-esque. His name was typed, but the signature wasn't his. It was Trisha's. She'd signed it herself. I set the paper on the workbench and stared at it. She was trying to use a ghost attorney to scare me into silence. I drove straight to the courthouse and handed the document to Ada Jennings, who had taken over the criminal investigation. "She's impersonating counsel now," I said, handing her the letter. No bar number, no license disclosure, just her handwriting and a made-up threat. Jennings studied it and nodded slowly. "This is impersonation of legal authority. She's digging her own grave." I was already halfway back to my truck when she called after me. "Fairley, you might want to come by tomorrow morning. We're unsealing the indictment." I showed up at 8 sharp. The session was closed to the public, but Jennings walked me through the charges afterward in her office. Trisha had been indicted on 5 felony counts: criminal fraud, falsification of public documents, misappropriation of funds, impersonation of legal authority, and interference with a government investigation. There were also 3 misdemeanor charges involving unauthorized surveillance and harassment of multiple residents. One of those residents had been secretly recorded during a board meeting without consent using a hidden mic planted under the table. The recorder had been found during a sweep ordered by the interim board. When confronted, Trisha claimed it was for note-taking accuracy. The judge didn't buy it. Warrants were issued for Trisha's devices, and her home was searched the following week. It didn't go smoothly. She barricaded herself inside her house with all the blinds drawn, refusing to answer the door for over an hour. Deputies had to contact her husband at work and have him convince her to come out. When they finally got inside, they found a home office with walls covered in corkboards and pinned-up maps of the neighborhood. Each property was labeled with notes in red ink, some of them deeply personal. Medical conditions, family schedules, income estimates. It was surveillance, plain and simple. She'd been keeping files on over 50 households. The sheriff's department collected everything, sealed it into evidence, and transferred it to the state prosecutor's office. Later that day, Jennings called again. "She's not talking," she said. But her husband is. Apparently, he'd been in the dark for most of it. He'd thought her volunteer work had just been ornamental, something to keep her busy. But once he saw the files, the fake assessments, and the private account statements, he agreed to turn over his financial records. Turned out several large deposits had been made into a joint savings account, money he couldn't trace. He filed for legal separation 3 days later. Meanwhile, the community held its first open meeting under the new board. I didn't speak, but I sat in the back and listened. Olivia ran it like a professional, clear agenda, time limits, and no interruptions. Walt presented the revised budget, which removed over 30 line items that had never been approved by vote. They reduced dues by almost 40%. Then came the town hall portion. One after another, residents stood up and shared stories. A couple on Spruce Hollow had been fined for inadequate landscaping, despite their yard being within code. A disabled veteran had been threatened with lien action for installing a wheelchair ramp. A single mother had been told her backyard trampoline lowered community value and was ordered to remove it under threat of penalty. Each story peeled back a layer of the rot Tricia had built. When Olivia closed the meeting, people actually clapped, not out of politeness but relief. The next morning I got a call from Caleb Rourke, the internal affairs detective. "You free this afternoon?" he asked. "There's something you should see." He met me at the county evidence facility. Inside, he led me to a table where a single folder sat. He opened it and pushed a photo toward me. It was one of Tricia's maps. My property was circled in red. Next to it, she'd written, "Too visible, must be neutralized." I looked up. Neutralized. She had a list of properties she considered threats. Yours was at the top. He handed me another photo, this one of a typed page labeled contingencies. Underneath were a series of bullet points. Apply pressure through legal nuisance discredit via community whisper campaign push zoning complaint through anonymous filing escalate to county ethics board if needed. She was building a playbook, I said. And executing it, Rourke replied. We found drafts of fake complaints she meant to file with the state licensing board trying to get your certification reviewed. My jaw tightened. That's career sabotage. She crossed a lot of lines. And she's going to pay for it. That afternoon, the court set her bail at $100,000. She posted it within the hour, but the conditions were strict: no contact with Whispering Pines residents, no HOA involvement, and no use of electronic communication for business purposes. She tried to fight the terms, but the judge shut it down. The trial date was set for 6 weeks later. When it came, the courtroom was packed. I testified on the third day, presenting the documents, the camera footage, and the forged legal letter. Jennings guided the questioning with surgical precision. Tricia's defense tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that she had been overwhelmed, that others had handled the finances, that she never meant to deceive. But the jury wasn't buying it. After 7 days of testimony and 2 hours of deliberation, the verdict came down. Guilty on all 5 felonies and all 3 misdemeanors. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. She got 8 years, with eligibility for parole after 5. She was taken into custody immediately. As she was let out, she glanced across the courtroom, not at me, but at the new board members, the residents who had taken back their neighborhood. Her face didn't show rage or fear, just disbelief, like she still couldn't fathom that her little fiefdom had crumbled. The next weekend, I helped a neighbor dig out a collapsed drainage pipe behind his shed. While we worked, a few of the kids from the street rode by on bikes, waving as they passed. One of them yelled, "Thanks for fixing the HOA." I chuckled and kept digging. Later that evening, Olivia stopped by with a folder. Inside were the revised bylaws and a petition to formalize a new charter for the community, one that strictly limited board power, required full transparency for all spending, and banned any future board member from serving consecutive terms without a community vote. "We wanted to name the charter after you," she said. I shook my head. "Don't need my name on anything, just glad people are safe again." She nodded, understanding. "Then maybe just one thing." She handed me a framed certificate with the new community slogan printed at the bottom: "No more silence, no more fear, just neighbors." I hung it in the cabin's entryway, not because I needed recognition, but because it reminded me that justice doesn't come from titles or positions. It comes from standing your ground quietly, firmly, and with the full weight of truth behind you. And sometimes, that's more than enough.